of low impact development and how these techniques can promote healthy communities. And when I say communities, one thing that we've mentioned throughout this education series is how important community is. Reducing non-point source pollution and being more resilient is about us all working together towards solutions to reduce our impacts on our environment. It takes a community. LED isn't a concept, LED isn't a new concept, I should say, but we have started talking more about it because of nutrient pollution and because of how it can be incorporated into development to reduce the impacts of flooding from storm surge and sea level rise. And by collaborating with public and private partners across jurisdictional boundaries, we hope to enhance an understanding of the value of green space, green infrastructure, as a way to prevent pollution from entering our surface and groundwater bodies, and as a way to provide us with a buffer for storm and flooding conditions. So we hope you all enjoy the workshop tonight, and I'm going to hand back over to Kelly McGee.
Thank you, Katrina. All right, very good. And for those of you who just joined us, again, we are recording tonight's meeting. And if you have questions or comments, please type those into the chat box. We will begin with our keynote address from Dr. Wendy Anderson. And after that, we will proceed with our panel discussion. And then we will hear about some solutions and some options for low impact development. And then we're gonna ask for some takeaways, which really are actions that each one of us individually and us collectively can choose to pursue. Again, this is an educational forum, and we're really hoping that this is the beginning of a great dialogue. So Miss Wendy Anderson, I'm gonna ask you to please unmute and join us while I introduce you. There she is. So everyone, this is Dr. Wendy Anderson. She is an environmental scientist, an educator who has devoted her life to research and teaching future environmental leaders and to improving the communities and regions where she's lived. Her areas of scientific expertise include nutrient flow through ecosystems, strategies for maintaining biodiversity, and promoting sustainable businesses and communities. Dr. Anderson is a professor and the former chair of the Department of Environmental Science and Studies at Stetson University. She also co-led the launch of Stetson's Institute for Water and Environmental Resilience in 2015 and contributed to the planning of the new Sandra Stetson Aquatic Center at Lake Beersford, which showcases green infrastructure, a native botanical garden, including pollinator gardens, bioswales, and nutrient management strategies for stormwater ponds. Twice elected to the HOA Board of Directors of one of the largest neighborhoods in DeLand, Dr. Anderson co-chairs that HOA's Board Environmental Advisory Committee that promotes the conservation of irrigation water and the improvement of stormwater pond quality and quantity by applying low impact development and Florida-friendly landscape principles. These efforts save money, protect surface and groundwater quality, and enhance biodiversity of the constructed landscapes and the 400 acres of protected nature preserve in this 2,000 acre master planned community. In November of 2020, she was elected to the Board of Supervisors of the Soil and Water Conservation District, and then immediately was chosen by the board to serve as the chair. She's busy. She also serves on the St. Johns River to Sea Loop Alliance Board of Directors and was recently appointed to the City of DeLand Economic Development Committee. Dr. Wendy Anderson, thank you so much.
Thank you, Kelly and Katrina, for having me speak tonight. I've been thinking about this for ever since you invited me, and thinking this is actually one of the most important conversations I've ever been a part of. And, I'm very excited to see the list of participants who are with us tonight. Again, so many elected officials and staff members from our county and the cities of Volusia County who are involved every single day in these kinds of decisions. And so this is just a really important conversation to start. I think the conversation we're having tonight is a start, And hopefully we can continue to have many more of these in the weeks, months, and years to come. My remarks to you tonight will focus more on the why we might want to incorporate more low impact development principles in our community design. Not going so much into the how. That's really the job of landscape architects and engineers and community designers to really break out those details. And I hope we can have some follow-on workshops where we really drill down into that. So I am coming to you tonight as an environmental scientist, as a board member of an HOA, and as a supervisor on the Soil and Water Conservation District. Those are my roles, but I am not speaking on behalf of my employer or my HOA or the Soil and Water District. These are just my comments, my opinions, my educated opinions as a scientist. So, and I also want to just note that I have been talking about and teaching about low impact development for about 15 years. And I really do think it's one of the most useful set of principles for guiding community development that I've seen. So, Kelly, should I share my screen, or are you going to post my my PowerPoint for me? I think I can do it. Okay. Let me just go ahead and get this rolling. Okay, so this is just a photo from Victoria Park in DeLand, where we have 400 acres of conservation land that is set aside and kind of interdigitating in between our developed portions of the property. And I was just over there last week doing a survey of gopher tortoises with one of my students, and I just thought this was a beautiful little vignette of seeing these nesting sandhill cranes, literally 100 feet from people's backyards. And so I thought it would be an appropriate place to start here. But really, this is where we should start. Again, low impact development as a concept has been around for at least 15 to 20 years. And in fact, I would even say what's new is very old. It's ancient. The principles we're trying to explain here really go back to how humans have lived on the land, for thousands of years before now. And how can we bring some of these principles forward to our current time in such a way that we can develop in the ways we need to develop to accommodate a growing population, but still maintain the ecosystem functions of the natural areas and the land that we've been living on. In 2010, I was still teaching at Drury University in Springfield, Missouri, and this book was published by the University of Arkansas Center for Community Design. One of the wealthiest philanthropists in the region, whose efforts were focused on water quality challenges in the beautiful lakes of the Ozarks and the Ouachita Mountains, dropped into my office one day. And I'm just going to name drop a little here just to be obnoxious. This person was the longtime boyhood best friend and fishing buddy of Johnny Morris, who some of you may know is the founder of the Bass Pro Shops. And of course, Bass Pro has its corporate headquarters and was originated in Springfield, Missouri. So these guys, there's a whole group of visionaries in Southwest Missouri who came together, and they got the University of Arkansas to put this book together, and they funded it, and then they started distributing it everywhere. So this person walks into my office carrying a box of books, and he says, "I know you teach an environmental science class to students from the School of Architecture, and I wonder if you would be interested in perhaps using this book in your class." And he said, "If you are, I'll leave you with the whole box, and you can just give the students the book for free." And of course, we don't typically do that. We find our own stuff. We don't really just teach what, wealthy donors tell us to teach. But I took a look, and I trusted this person, and I thought, this is it. This book is the best manual I have seen for really helping budding young architects who are interested in green architecture and green urban design, to really give them the toolkit that they need to do this kind of design and development. So I introduced it to you tonight, even though it was published in 2010. It's still relevant. It's still current. You can find a copy of it at that website that I've posted below here, the University of Arkansas Center for Design, Community Design Center. And so anyway, I ended up using, yes.
Okay, before you move on to your next slide, just a quick sound check. I believe your microphone is touching your scarf.
Okay,
and so
all right.
There you go.
I'll hold it up.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Sure. So I ended up using this book for for several semesters with this population of future architects, and they loved it. You know, they could end up. I ended up doing a lot of senior thesis, sitting on senior thesis committees with the students from the School of Architecture, and I was just always tickled to death when I would see them bringing these concepts into the designs that they were presenting as seniors. And I'm like, yes, okay, they've learned something. So I point this out because you know, the general idea of low impact development is that we're really trying to move away from or do more of a sort of synthesis of hard engineering solutions and replace them with more soft engineering solutions, and soft solutions that actually preserve the very, very valuable, sometimes priceless ecosystem services that that are already occurring in the natural areas that are being developed. So this, you know, I could run through the whole list here, but you're looking at them and reading them. So I'll let you just go ahead and do that. So so as we've gone through this past year, most of us have lived in a much more conscribed and smaller radius around our homes. We haven't traveled as much. We haven't gone out to eat as much. We've really been living in our homes and in our neighborhoods much more intensely and intentionally than maybe we had before. And we're beginning to understand more and more this idea of what community really is. And so I really appreciate that Katrina started us off with a remark about what community and what does community look like. And so when we're talking about neighborhoods as communities, are we talking about, you know, what are we, I present some pictures here, you know, to show people doing things together. I think community is about togetherness and about sharing time together. It's about shared joy. It's about supporting each other through tough times. It's about playing together, walking together, cycling together, exploring nature together, gardening together, eating together, sitting together, talking together, taking care of each other. And those who seek that kind of community, they often seek out high density neighborhoods to live in. And so the problem is, anytime we live in high density, we have an impact on the environment. This is just a fact. And, you know, and I think that we can't really dance around the reality that all development, whatever it may be, has a detrimental impact. And so the question is, how can we do it in such a way that we minimize impact? In DeLand, over here on the southeast quadrant of DeLand, we're watching the conversion of our upland forest along Martin Luther King Jr. Beltway rapidly transform the landscape. And I want to acknowledge that in 1998, my neighborhood too was still gopher tortoise habitat and sandhill crane habitat and scrub jay habitat, indigo snake habitat. The house I owned before my current one was built in 1964. That neighborhood too had once been a beautiful ecosystem and productive farmland before those houses were built. Any of us living in Florida cannot claim any kind of moral superiority for having lived in a place with zero human impact. Our mere presence here always has an impact. And so it's really become, you know, my personal and professional and now political goals to help us have this conversation about how we can live together in these communities with as minimal an impact as possible. And I think low impact development really provides, like I said, a toolkit for this. So first, some ecological perspectives. And I'm going to show various slides that just have this information over to the left, just sitting there. And I'm not going to read it to you, but it's just going to show up time and time again. I'm just going to talk to you and tell you stories, but I want you to read through these general principles as you listen to me. So the primary principle of low impact development is about conserving as much natural area as possible and the ecosystem functions that that natural area provides. And within that, to support biodiversity. Most of the scientists that I know agree that we're currently living through the 6th mass extinction of the history of our planet. Climate change and habitat loss are billed as the 2 largest driving forces in local and global extinctions. When I was in college in the 1980s, 35 years ago, ecologists, conservation biologists, and land managers were embracing new ideas about regional scale habitat protection and smarter ways to plan for large land conversion. This new field of landscape ecology, not landscape as in your lawn, but the landscape, as in the view you see out of an airplane window or now by Google Maps. That's what we mean by landscape ecology. It's organized around the idea that we must keep natural ecosystems and habitats connected to each other to facilitate movements among habitat patches of the species who have always lived there. Some land use conversions might function more as barriers to movement rather than facilitators of movement. It all depends on which species we're talking about and what the land change really represents. The Florida Wildlife Corridor runs from South Florida and branches to the east and to the west through the middle of the peninsula. With the East Corridor to the Florida Panhandle, you'll notice that the East Corridor comes right through Volusia County. The corridor is made up of protected public lands and private lands. Those private lands are either already in conservation easements or they just have yet to be developed. But many of those private lands are at risk of being converted to land uses that are not conducive to wildlife habitat or corridors. We must stay mindful of this. We often see in development plans indications of the ratio of developed land to open space. Those open spaces are often relatively low quality in terms of habitat or other ecological functions like water purification and recharge of the aquifer. Utility easements, stormwater ponds, golf courses, and sports facilities often get counted in that open space. While those land uses are legitimate, we cannot count those as open spaces, as synonymous with wildlife habitat. And it is variable whether they are useful for maintaining the regional hydrology. I show this particular landscape view of the central part of Volusia County just to remind us that that middle part of the county is our wildlife corridor. And particularly along that 415 and Highway 44 corridor, we are beginning to kind of close in with development and kind of block off that major corridor, that major statewide, peninsula-wide corridor. Okay, so I know most everybody on this webinar tonight is familiar with Florida hydrology, but I thought it was important to just kind of make sure everybody's up to speed with this. So in addition to thinking about our land as shared space with all of the other creatures who call Florida home, low impact development principles provide guidance for protecting our water resources. Throughout Florida, we have a surficial aquifer. So that is the sandy layer that is on the surface. And we have a deep Floridan aquifer, mostly made of limestone, that is beneath the lower parts of the state. And they're separated by a confining layer that is thick in some places and thin in other places. And this interesting little overlay map that came out from the Florida Springs Institute recently actually has a nice depiction of that. The surficial aquifer, extends across the whole state. The deep Floridan aquifer extends, yes, well up into Georgia, South Carolina. But you'll notice here, this map of the confining layer, that it's quite thin. So if you go down to the legend down here, we have a thin confining layer throughout the central part of the state. And so our connections between the surficial aquifer and the deeper Floridan are kind of usually more connected through here than usual, than in other parts of the state. So we know that anything we put on the land either runs off horizontally to a pond or a river, or it percolates through the sand of the surficial aquifer. In the eastern part of the county, the nutrients and pesticides we apply to land flow through the surface or subsurface conduits that make their way eventually to the Indian River Lagoon and Mosquito Lagoon, or to the Tomoka and Halifax rivers. In the western part of the county, these pollutants make their way through the surficial aquifer directly into the Floridan, and then they come out at our springs, Blue Spring, Alexander Springs, De Leon Springs. And so, so we have to really think about the impact on our springs health and the health of the St. Johns River. We often talk about the importance of wetlands as both filters for pollutants and places where the recharge of the aquifer happens. Really, it's the uplands, the places most attractive to development, that are most important for aquifer recharge. Some wetlands, those that are formed from historic sinkholes, have direct connections to the Florida aquifer. And this actually increases the risk of contamination of our drinking water supply. Other wetlands, those that are perched atop thick confining layers, are great filters for pollutants, but they don't actually directly recharge the aquifer. The water from those wetlands would seep more horizontally, out beyond those wetlands, and then recharge kind of out beyond there. So it's essential that when we're developing in those prime real estate uplands, that we maintain as much percolation capacity, infiltration capacity within the landscape as possible to facilitate maximum recharge of our aquifer. Because our county relies almost completely on the Floridan aquifer for our drinking water, this is critically important. Minimizing impervious surfaces is an important element of low impact development. Roadways, driveways, sidewalks, and buildings cover areas where recharge used to happen. Using pervious pavers for driveways and for low speed roadways can facilitate recharge. Installing rain gardens and bioswales in right-of-ways between homes can also collect rainwater and direct that water directly into the aquifer. So that can also reduce the need for stormwater ponds. Of course, we've got regulations that tell us how big and how many stormwater ponds we have to install, but eventually we may demonstrate enough that when we do these other kinds of development principles, we can actually not have to build quite so much hard stormwater infrastructure. That's we aren't supposed to talk policy tonight, but that might be policy change, coming down the pike later if we can demonstrate this well enough, as many other states have done. Another interesting solution is, and this comes from Dr. Eben Bean up at the University of Florida Center for Landscape Use Efficiency. He has done a lot of research in a lot of the neighborhoods in North Central Florida that demonstrate that when you spread a layer of 3 to 6 inch layer of compost over the compacted sand of a building site before you lay the sod, that the sod actually establishes better, the roots grow deeper and faster, deeper into the sand beneath, and they help actually break up the compacted sand. Low impact would actually say, don't compact the sand except underneath the building site anyway. But if you have a compacted site, this compost application before laying sod actually speeds up the capacity for that sodded yard to infiltrate water better. So anyway, lots of solutions that are built into that. So while it's important, I'm going to kind of change subjects on you a little bit here. So while it's important to maintain ecosystem functions from the natural areas that we are converting to residential and commercial development, we also have to think about the fact that much of our land in Volusia County is in farmland, and it's often the farmland that is being converted most readily into these new suburban and residential developments. And so I begin to wonder, is there a way that we can actually preserve the food production capacity of our county, as well as the ecosystem functions when we do our developments? And so there's a new trend that maybe many of you are aware of. Some of you maybe have never heard of it. There's a new trend across the nation and even across Florida that people often refer to as designing and building agrihoods. And so an agrihood is a neighborhood that still has an agricultural center and purpose to it. And so there are actually quite a few. Here's one up in Tallahassee, Pine Duff Farm. I don't know if, while you're listening to me, you might be reading this really kind of charming description that they give of living in a neighborhood like this. Here's one in Palm Beach. Isn't this a cute little boy with his carrots? And so these are really becoming very very sought after, highly desirable neighborhoods that actually sell for a pretty high price point. Okay, so can we do this? So locally, more, at least closer to home, here's an interesting example of this. It's called The Grow. And it's a farm and garden community, but it's a neighborhood. And I'll just go ahead and read to you this blurb, which is, let me see if I can get it to where I can see it. Okay, The Grow is a residential farm and garden community inspired by healthy living and rural lifestyle, enabling people to forge a relationship with the land and each other amongst a working farm, community gardens, and social amenities in an idyllic setting that is steeped in nostalgia and mindful of nature. So cute. And so, I mentioned that's actually in Oviedo. I said Orlando, but it's really in the midst of urban sprawl right there. And so let's look at it a little bit more. Here's an actual community schematic. So you can see everything that's going on in The Grow. It's waterfront and all the waterfront amenities. It's got this nifty restaurant that's a farm and table restaurant. Here's the farmer's market and this little pedestrian boulevard. Here's townhomes and single family homes, a nature preserve out here on the fringe, the working farm at the very core, a little commercial district, some multifamily housing and condos. And then most of the traffic is retained kind of towards the fringe, except for, where people actually live. So that's cool. I mean, how many people, would actually pay a premium to live in a community like this? Well, it turns out quite a few. So, here's just another list of all the amenities that they have. The community gardens, the community park, recreational trails, edible landscape trails, on-site agriculturists, which is a multi-syllabic word for farmers, a farmer's market, farm and table restaurant, all those things I just mentioned, cute Florida farmhouse architecture. So why aren't we doing more of this? So anyway, I wanted to, with that, give a quick nod also to the importance of having our neighborhoods connect to alternative forms of transportation. And so, low impact development and green infrastructure, always have to take into account our transportation needs. And, and I know that oftentimes when we're proposing new developments, the traffic congestion and those types of concerns are often kind of front and center on people's minds. But we have world-class trails in Volusia County. We have the intersection of two of Florida's Sun Trails. The St. Johns River to Sea Loop goes across a 5-county region, 260 miles. It connects to the Coast to Coast Trail, the trail that goes around Lake Monroe. Our Springs to Springs Trail along the west side of the county is part of the River to Sea Loop, as is the trails that go along A1A along the east side. But what we don't have is well-developed trails that cut across the county, across Highway 40 or Highway 44, to actually allow people to move safely in separated bike lanes across, from east to west. And what we need then too is for neighborhoods to connect to these larger regional trail systems. It's cool for people to be able to, get on their bike and tool around their neighborhood, just internally. But some people actually want to get out and ride longer distances and to feel safe doing that. So, so I just wanted to throw that on the table here, that as we do these kinds of developments, we need to think about transit in the midst of all of that. So I want to wrap up then with some insights into my life living in one of these planned developments. So I come to you tonight as a customer, as a person who made a decision to live in a place like this. And so I chose to move to Victoria Park in DeLand in 2018. And I chose it because I had heard since the year 2000 that it was designed as an exemplary green community. I knew the newer houses were more energy efficient than the 1960s vintage home I was living in. And my daughter wanted a pool and tennis courts and fitness center and neighborhood friends, even though my observations from speeding by on Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, were that the newer phases didn't seem to be saving as many of the original trees. And yeah, I was even sometimes that crazy person that would like veer off to the side and, when a gopher tortoise was crossing the road and, try to stop traffic to keep, traffic from smashing the tortoise. But, but I still believed that there was something different about this neighborhood. And my realtor was showing me comparables in lots of other neighborhoods. The houses were all the same. But I just kept saying, I am willing to pay a little more. I might even be willing to pay a lot more to live in Victoria Park because I believed it was a green community. So here's why I believed that. The original vision for Victoria Park emerged from a multi-stakeholder process involving the developer, St. Joe Arvida, the City of DeLand, Volusia County, and the East Central Florida Regional Planning Council. I'm going to read to you from page 1. I'm going to read it to you from page 1 of the development plan. The goals of this project are to integrate a large mixed-use development into the fabric of the city by creating an open space system coupled with a balanced transportation system, an array of distinctive neighborhoods, and a village center, which will include a mix of uses such as office, retail, and housing within the community. The vision for Victoria Park combines the qualities of historic neighborhoods with the progressive attributes of today's successful communities. It recognizes the significant community enhancement achieved through careful preservation and cultivation of the natural environment and the creation of pedestrian-friendly neighborhoods that contribute to an attractive small town scale. Victoria Park will integrate the built environment with the existing natural environment to create a unique place within the city of DeLand. So I believed that. And I would say I still kind of, sort of, mostly believe that. Except, yeah, once I got into the neighborhood and I looked around, what I saw was that maybe over time, this is a 20+ year development, maybe over time we have sort of drifted away from that original vision. And I decided I wanted to see if I could get on the HOA board and maybe, do a little culture change and maybe wield a little influence with the developer before they left to see if we might be able to return to those original principles. And so, yeah, I was actually allowed to establish this environmental advisory committee. We decided that we would focus on the issues of stormwater pond quality, and strategies for improving stormwater pond, reducing our irrigation water needs. And we mostly irrigate with reclaimed water and supplement with, collected stormwater and the occasional groundwater draw. but the reclaimed water costs money. So trying to keep HOA dues down and to really continue promoting Florida-friendly landscaping materials and principles. And so, so we've been pushing, and we've been pushing hard with the community management company, with the landscape maintenance company, with the developer, to actually, change a few things around the neighborhood. We've started installing more littoral shelf plantings around our ponds, which of course is great for capturing nutrients running down the hill, as well as sucking nutrients out of the pond that might have arrived through the storm drains. It's also just great habitat for wildlife. And we've been working with our landscape maintenance company, which is Brightview, to have them be mindful of these changes we're trying to make. And when they have to do material replacements, replace dead shrubs or whatever, like, please put in these Florida-friendly plants. And so we're making progress, but I will say it is harder to fix it after it's already built. It's so much better if it's designed in from the beginning and built the right way from the beginning, because it is really hard to just sort of, put a Band-Aid on an amputated limb. That's kind of a gruesome analogy perhaps, but it is just so much better if we can do it the right way from the beginning. And so I just want to leave you with this final thought, which is that people will pay more for this. They will. In Victoria Gardens, which is our 55 and up section of the neighborhood, people pay a premium to get to see this. When they're backed up to the conservation area, they pay a $10,000 or $15,000 premium on their sale price. Why? Because people like to watch the sandhill cranes nesting. And really, I want to bring it out to an even bigger concept, which, when we talk about sustainable development, we really have to think about this intersection of what is good for people, what's good for the environment, and what's good for the economy. And I think we've seen time and time again across the nation and across the developments in Florida, that when we develop with the environment in mind and in such a way that improves the health and well-being and quality of life for the residents who live there, there is a higher profit margin. Developers can actually make more money doing that. And I'm an MBA student too, and I was in a class last night, and my management professor said, we've got to stop leading with making the business case for everything. Like, sometimes you just have to do the right thing because it's the right thing. But I'll just resist that and say, no, this is the right thing, and it is good for the bottom line. And so so I do really hope that that as developers are looking at new ways to develop that make their neighborhoods distinctive, that set them apart from all the other neighborhoods that are popping up, that they'll think about low impact development as a strategy for for creating a nicer place to live, and ultimately for protecting the environment, protecting our water quality, protecting the lagoon and the rivers, and so we can continue to enjoy those and have the tourism and everything else that that is associated with that. So I hope we can find a way to develop better in this county.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wendy Anderson. That was phenomenal. And we did have a question during your presentation, but I'm going to hold on to that question for part of the panel discussion, because we do have a very distinguished panel coming up. And in just a moment, I'm going to introduce Carrie Carl, who is the Executive Director of VCARD. And this is an association of responsible developers in Volusia County. And the way that that Carrie and VCARD came to be involved in this panel discussion was, I think, really outstanding. show of leadership on Carrie's part. She actually joined in a meeting with the Volusia Flagler Environmental Coalition, and basically said, hey, let's work together. Let's have different community voices. Let's all work together and see if we can find common ground. And we started talking about ways that we can do educational programs. And so VCARD jumped on board, and Carrie was able to recruit some really outstanding speakers for our panel. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to very quickly, I meant to do this before we got started today. There are 4 slides that that VCARD has actually come up with, and that the panelists have come up with, and are kind of interesting. And actually, let's see, I'm going to refresh my screen. And just so that you all can see what we're getting ready to talk about in our panel discussion here. We have got, and I'm going to, just so you all know, if the videos of the speakers are in your way, if you can't see a part of the screen, you can actually move those photos around your screen so that you can see all parts of the screen. So these slides that I'm going to show you right now, before I toss it over to Carrie and the panel, really we're really focusing in this evening on stormwater, low impact development. How can we retain our stormwater, clean our stormwater, work with nature? Well, as we're doing that, there are a lot of challenges to that and barriers to low impact development. So we want to just take a look at this. And some of these slides are very similar to a couple of the slides that Wendy showed us. She showed us a diagram of basically the stormwater system of a conventional water management system. Typically, water is collected from lots. They are piped to ponds, and there are outfall control devices as well as dry detention. So in other words, the sort of least expensive, most efficient way, sort of clustering these homes, piping the water into ponds. And then we have a comparison of what we just saw, conventional development, where trees and vegetation are sort of, a roadway amenity in many cases, and you may have a couple of large stormwater ponds. LID, you can see there's a lot of green that is integrated into the system, some more open spaces, and the wetland ponds become smaller as the green expands, but there are some benefits. But just to highlight a couple of the features that one might see in low impact development: native landscaping, plants that would attract pollinators, native plants, meaning plants that are naturally existing in Florida, typically are hardy plants that can tolerate a lot of sun. They can tolerate droughts. Some of them can tolerate inundation. So they're adapted well to this this environment, and they can use less irrigation once they're established. We have sort of naturalized attention, so we're sort of using biomimicry, which is where we use Mother Nature's design in our built environment. And again, we have some other techniques like vegetated swales, which are, I like to call them, they're sort of these dips that you see adjacent to roads. And those can help filter pollution, uptake water, minimize floods. And then of course you also have these bioswales where you can actually do some pretty high-tech integration of stormwater management below and adjacent to parking areas, where you'll have actually curb cuts where you actually design the water flow from runoff when the water rains, flows laterally across the surface into an area that either will absorb it or convey it into another location. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I am going to welcome Miss Carrie Carl to introduce her panel. Carrie.
Thank you, Kelly, and good evening, everyone. I am Carrie Carl, and I am really pleased that my organization, the Volusia County Association for Responsible Development, or VCARD, because that's such a mouthful, could participate in this workshop. I do want to thank my VCARD members who helped me put together this panel, including the panelists. And a quick shout out to Jake Stair and Zev Cohen. Thank you so much for your willingness to help me so much. Let me go ahead and introduce our wonderful panel for this evening. I'm going to start with Dennis Church. Dennis serves as Director of Planning, Landscape Architecture, and Entitlements for Minto Communities USA. And you may know one of those developments in Daytona Beach as Latitudes Margaritaville. Dennis is a certified planner and a registered landscape architect. His past projects have received numerous awards from the Council for Sustainable Florida, as well as working on 15 Audubon certified golf courses and communities. We have Hugh Matthews, who is the president and CEO of England, Thames and Miller. England, Thames and Miller is part of the project team for Avalon Park Group in Daytona Beach. As a professional civil engineer, Hugh has been part of many landmark development and infrastructure projects, including much of the urban core redevelopment in Jacksonville. We have Carl Sauterholm, who is director of England, Thames and Miller's Placemaking Group. Carl is a licensed landscape architect, a certified planner, and a certified arborist. His work has taken him throughout the Southeast, Puerto Rico, and Colorado, with projects ranging from national cemeteries to master plan communities to healthcare projects. Bruce Doig is the director of VHB's Water Resources Department. Bruce has, as a civil engineer, has provided support for urban roadways, drainage infrastructure, mixed-use developments, and city centers. And prior to joining VHB, Bruce was the division director of transportation and stormwater at the city of Altamont Springs. And finally, to be ready to offer local public sector perspective, we have Clay Irvin, Director of Growth and Resource Management at Volusia County. He oversees aspects like environmental management and land planning. And Clay has a lot of private sector experience, including the Farmington Master Development of Regional Impact. And prior to Volusia County, Clay was the Director of Landscape Architecture and Planning for Zev Cohen and Associates. So that is our panel for this evening. And I'm going to go ahead and jump in. Dennis, you worked on the first green development certified by the Florida Green Building Council. And I know you had a couple of photos to share to give everyone some examples of what low impact development looks like in the field. Dennis, if you could talk me through, I'm going to go ahead and show these images. If you want to go ahead and talk through some of these examples.
Well, before I do that, I'd really like to say I really enjoyed Dr. Anderson's presentation. And if anybody on this audience doesn't really understand the biology, geology, hydrology of Florida, the first half of her presentation was a really good primer that's worth looking at again. And I appreciate her acknowledgement that all of us live on a piece of land that used to be natural habitat. So I guess your question at first was some examples of low impact design in Florida. So I just picked a few quick images. This one actually is in Charleston, but those little planters you see there are water gardens, rain gardens, and all the pavement you see there is porous paving, and the little curb cuts allow all the rain that doesn't get absorbed in the pavers to go into the planting area, and then it's tied into outfall like you saw in those diagrams. Next slide. And this is just a photo grab I got from Google Earth. It's a set of rain gardens in Tampa in an urban area. Basically, it's a very high density apartment area, and they have limited areas for water management. So they spent the extra money to build the retaining walls and the water systems. You can see that area is depressed instead of just being a filled planter. So they incorporated rain gardens as part of the streetscape. And next slide. So in Florida, most of the LID projects in the sense where you use these innovative techniques they're either in urban areas where there's limited areas for water management, or they're in public spaces or campus settings where the owners, whether it's a developer or a public entity, want to, sort of express their commitment to green development. In a lot of cases in Florida, you'll see large scale, low impact design as part of the water management system or the environmental restoration system. The granddaddy of the best example of low impact design is the Woodlands outside of Houston, Texas, which is a huge master plan community, tens of thousands of acres, that really started the low impact design and master plan communities. And they have demonstrated through scientific peer reviewed studies that they've reduced their peak runoff by 2 to 3 times of what it would be if they had used the traditional pipe and culvert type system. So, but here the image on the screen is the Brooks and Bonita Springs that I worked on. This property clearly is a master plan community with a golf course. The entire site was scraped clean by the previous owner, except for major cypress heads. And so we restored this sort of system you see here with a curved creek and all the planting. So pretty much all of that is replanted with native plants and upland islands for habitat diversity and catchment areas for during the dry season with wood storks. And so this is, and what this does is you have the conventional stormwater system sort of up the hill is the ponds shown with the pipes that run out of the neighborhoods to the ponds. And what this system does is gives it another layer of treatment after the conventional system. So this sort of master plan community scale is not unique. Many large scale master plan communities across Florida and the Southeast use these, but they're not necessarily visible within the neighborhoods where people walk around and drive their cars. So, there's sort of a blend there. So I will turn it back to you, Carrie.
All right, very good. Thank you, Dennis. I think we all agree to the merits of low impact development, particularly when it relates to stormwater. But I think what everyone wants to know is, what are those barriers? And so, Hugh, I'm going to ask you, on our prep call, you mentioned that in some areas, the soil percolation is a real issue. Can you just kind of elaborate on the significance of that, particularly in Volusia County?
Thank you, Carrie, and thank you for everyone joining us. Our experience if you take Volusia County, you've got the dunes along the coast, and then it kind of drops off into the central developed part of Ormond, Daytona Beach, et cetera, I-95, and then west of I-95, it ultimately drops off into Tiger Bay. And so, and then back up the ridge over where the land is. So we see different topography and different soil types as you move east to west across the county. You can look along the coastline. There's some excellent examples of LID development right there at Ocean Center. There's a large public area. It was developed by the public. So it's public area, it's stormwater, but it serves as green space about 90% of the time. When you move over to the corridor west of I-95, so you've got LPGA, the Minto project, Margaritaville, that Dennis was speaking of, up to Avalon Park, that area, you have really dropped down in your soils. And so we've got groundwater that is just either at the surface or just below the surface. And you've got soils that are much more clay in the soils, and so they do not percolate well at all. And then as you get back over to the land area, then the elevation pops way back up, and there, so there you're at elevation 60 or so, and there you've got opportunities for dry retention. I'll also point out, Carrie, that when we look at the stormwater ponds that we typically develop in new master plan communities or any project, about 75% of the pond is for flood attenuation. Between the cities and counties regulations, the water management district regulations, we have to attenuate the flow or the discharge for a 25-year storm. At that point, percolation is really not much of a factor because the rain is falling so fast in a 25-year storm that it has to be stored somewhere on site. That's about 75% of the pond's capacity. The other 25% is the treatment component of the pond, and it's that treatment component that really LID development can start to attack if we can do things like depress the groundwater, reduce the separation, increase percolation, look at bioswales and things of that nature. So that's the science behind LID, is it really depends on soil percolation. And to have percolation work, we've got to have both soil type and separation from groundwater. And along the area west of 95, you really don't have either of those. And so that presents some of the challenges.
Oh, I see. Well, you know, another piece that people say is a barrier is the cost aspect. Can you kind of speak to what elements are adding to the cost of LID?
Well, so if you go back and look at the bioswale examples that were introduced earlier, then the bioswales are, let's go back to that first slide that was shown. And let's just look at that real quick if we can. And so even before the bioswale, just the neighborhoods, let's back up from there. Let's go back to the neighborhoods. So, okay, right there. So we've got, you know, roughly in new projects today, now not an infill, and infill projects are totally different, but the large multi-hundred or 1,000-acre, multiple 1,000-acre communities, somewhere between 35 and 60% of that community is preserved for wetland or open space from the beginning. And so that land gets set aside, and then the upland buffers, which would be the light green in this, would be upland areas that are adjacent to the wetlands that are also preserved, and that by water management district regs are roughly 25 feet. And so when you start looking at the reduction in land, you start with 1,000 acres, you reduce it by half for wetland conservation, you're down to 500, you take out the upland buffers. And now we're starting to look at the development areas. So you start to look at drainage, the ponds, the easements, and those things to make the system work. So LID, I mean, it requires real estate. If you look at Ocean Center, it requires real estate to be set aside for LID. So it's a real estate impact. It's a cost impact. it costs more money to develop it during construction than it would otherwise. It costs more money to maintain it. So you've got to have a buyer that is willing, just like Dr. Anderson talked about, some buyers are willing to pay a premium for that. So you've got to have a group of buyers who are willing to pay for the increased cost of the real estate loss, the increased construction, and then the increased maintenance. And so I think that really is where we've got to attack it, is will our buyers really pay for the increased cost associated with it?
I see. Now, Bruce, with your time spent at VHB, what have you seen comes first? Have you found developers are aware of these practices and bring them up or shy away from them? Do you have to put them out there initially if they aren't aware of them? What have you seen in your experience?
So, hi, good evening, everybody. First of all, I'm enjoying this a lot. It's exceeding my expectations, so hopefully it keeps going that way when I talk. And as far as who goes first, it's a combination, and it really depends on the requirement that needs to be met by the project. And like all LID, it also, as mentioned before, it's very site specific. But if all the pieces align, VHB is always the first to recommend it as an option to our client. But I want to step back to regulations first, because research right now is prevalent in the stormwater circles that the current stormwater design and performance criteria has not been properly addressing nutrient loadings, resulting from this typical stormwater runoff conditions. But there's currently a governor mandated effort to rewrite the state stormwater rule. And a big requirement of this rule is to include LID in its criteria and its rules. How will these new technologies impact water quality performance? What guidelines are going to be given to engineers for design? And what I'm getting at is that soon it might not be a decision you make, soon it might be mandated, or soon it may be the best tool in the toolbox. So it may not be just up to the consulting engineers or the developers. And there are a few counties in Florida that have already adopted stormwater criteria for LID, creating their own manuals. But in the meantime, as regulations sort themselves out, we need to encourage the fact that LID and a treatment train approach of methods are much more effective to reduce runoff and improve water quality than the traditional wet detention, dry retention ponds. Many low impact design techniques are specifically designed for the Florida environment and work better as part of a treatment train system. They mimic pre-development conditions, and they can preserve ecosystem functions and environmental health. So no more of this single, very large pond to meet all the stormwater requirements of a large area. And those recognizing this right now, first are public entities, and second are developers of infill properties. So cities and counties are incorporating LID into their projects to receive credits for requirements that they have with FDEP. Many times these projects are incorporated along with educational signage to inform residents of the alternative stormwater techniques that are being used to improve stormwater quality. Bioswales along roadways, pervious pavements on parking lots and trails, rain gardens in parks, baffle boxes at outfalls are becoming more and more prevalent in city and county infrastructure projects. The city of Castleberry, for example, has an entire area of their Lake Concord Park dedicated to this. It's their event center park in the middle of the city. But they have all kinds of LID techniques being exposed there. And even the underground ones have glass covers. So you can see what's typically underground and you can't see how it's working from the top. This is a great educational resource for the public. As far as developers of infield properties, they're realizing that LID, when they're trying to develop a site, whether it's either trying to redevelop a site, whether it's an ocean of paved infrastructure already, an impervious parking lot, or it's a site with very tight space, to where a traditional stormwater pond would leave very little space for a developable area. These redevelopment sites were typically developed with very little or no stormwater criteria. and if they were to be redeveloped, would maybe have to adhere to new criteria. So instead of leaving this rundown strip mall to continue wasting away and polluting stormwater, the way to redevelop these sites is to use creative LID techniques that will end up providing better water quality conditions than the present state. We do this without using the majority of the site, and we can avoid that ugly, big, overgrown stormwater pond. So there's different motivations to use LID, and the next place where we really need to encourage it, and I think others are saying the same, without even just meeting them for the first time today, is that the traditional stormwater techniques, we need to move away from them and find these new technologies in the areas like greenfield sites and areas being developed for the first time. These are the areas where we're not experiencing a strong interest in LID.
I see. Very good. Carl, you are a designer of public spaces. Can you share if you're seeing a trend in more LID being implemented in these types of spaces with your clients?
Thank you, Carrie, and thank you for having me today. Really happy to be part of this panel. We are seeing more and more LID approaches, and really what we're probably seeing more is bits and pieces of it being used, not so much comprehensive full adoption of them. Sometimes they're adopted as a result of a specific site requirement, whether or not you're in a restricted basin or you have restricted outfalls. We've used it. One example we did in city of St. Augustine is a parking lot for a public library that was being redeveloped, where we did pervious concrete and dry detention, and very much a low impact approach. But that was actually driven by the fact that they were trying to preserve some majestic live oak trees on the site. And that drove a lot of that. But going into that, the city knew that it was going to accept a much higher cost for development of that site. Pervious concrete, for example, is about 2.5 times the cost of typical concrete. So it really helps having that client, that developer at the front end come in and be able to understand that they're going to absorb some of these additional costs in order to make their project successful.
Very good. I want to go back to something Bruce said about the regulatory environment, and it may be shifting. Let's say it doesn't shift. Do you feel that currently regulatory agencies are sort of set up in their review process to encourage more LID? And I'll open this up. I meant to have the raise hand feature, so I won't be able to see, but if one of our panelists would like to speak to the regulatory environment, are they really set up to review and encourage LID?
Would you like me to do that?
Clay, please do so.
Yes. Right now, I would say that every comprehensive plan, every set of land development regulations that you see in Volusia County, there is some sort of effort to either directly or indirectly allow for low impact development. There was a discussion earlier, and what we heard was, remember that this is not the development standards that we had in the 50s and the 60s, which allowed for basically clear cutting and building of what you see nowadays. Specifically in Volusia County, for example, we have a countywide standard that 15% of a development site has to be left in native vegetation retention areas. We have wetland standards in unincorporated that are greater than St. Johns River Water Management District standards. And depending on where it's located, if it's in our natural resource management area or in our ECHO environmental corridor overlay, you see additional buffers and additional restrictions on what can be done there. Adding to that, we have landscaping buffers and everything else. So what you heard, and I want everybody to realize, you're seeing 35 to 60% of sites are being left in open space requirements right off the bat under conventional development. So we have, for example, in Volusia County, the conservation subdivision standards. This allows for clustering, gives density bonuses for low impact development, dark skies, and a variety of other things. The critical thing, and Dr. Anderson hit it on the head, it's the buying public that's going to dictate to the developers what they want to come into the governments with. The simple fact is, you know, with our conservation subdivision, you get a 25% density bonus. So that's huge right off the bat, that if you come in there and you're preserving 70%, or excuse me, 65% of the area of wetlands and all these other things, so that we wind up with basically 25% of the land being developed, you can get additional bonuses. Unfortunately, we have not seen any of that occur. No one's taken advantage of that standard in our code. We've identified it. We've had several meetings with developers and landowners who've been interested in it. But unfortunately, it's not something that we're seeing being utilized because they just don't feel there's demand for it. The other thing, and not necessarily at Volusia County, but when I was at Ormond Beach, there was a discussion about a similar type of project. And one of the things that was identified is that maintenance is going to be difficult because like with a bioswale or some of those other things, you can't just leave it there. And that's the biggest problem, is that homeowners association, or if it's in the non-residential area, property owners associations will have to come back in there and have to do greater maintenance of those areas. So how can we as a local government try and modify that? Well, the problem you're doing is that you're assigning that, what we heard, like 25% of the treatment to these areas. Those are the areas that are absorbing the most. So if you have to come back and basically clean out some of the sand areas that you're using for filtration, or if you're getting a high concentration of what you're filtering out, there is going to be a need for costs above and beyond what is normally seen with the standard pipe and pond. So we are trying to do that. We encourage them. And I'm speaking right now just from a Volusia County's perspective. I can tell you that my experience at Ormond Beach, my experience at Port Orange, we all were seeking those types of developments where, again, you can integrate more of the natural area.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The thing that, and I'm kind of putting kind of a quick warning out to everybody, with sea level change and some of these other things that are occurring, what you're going to start seeing is concern about where is our building elevation going to be. And what we heard from the speakers earlier is that some of these lands are very low lying. So they will not be able to necessarily meet the base flood elevation without doing some kind of alteration to the grade. So how are we, and this is the challenge that we in the planning and development world need to come up with, is as we see more and more standards to protect for stormwater, flooding due to storms, and potential impacts from sea level change, how are we going to minimize the footprint of development as it occurs on these areas that are left for development in our county?
Understood. Now I saw Dennis actually raise his actual hand. Dennis, did you want to say something in regards to Clay's comment?
Well, I was going to ask, Clay mentioned the density bonus incentives, and nobody's for doing the low impact type community, and nobody's taken them up on it. My question is, what is the allowed density now? I mean, if it's only 1 per 5 and the bonuses only get you to, a unit per acre, that's not enough incentive. I don't know the specifics of the math, but you need to make sure that those incentives really are incentives that meet the financial hurdles that developers have. And I'll say this, people think that developers are making a gazillion dollars. Every deal is so tight because you have to meet, it's a risky business for one, so you have to make enough money to cover your risk. So every item you put on a project get scrutinized. And the real trick, the real way to make this happen is to convince developers that it's the right thing to do, one, and two, that it will help them be successful. If they see another community that is doing this kind of project and being more successful because of it, not just because it's a good market, but there's a clear correlation to this type of design, that would help as an incentive. And then the other thing that would be interesting to see is if in today's dollars, today's development costs, somebody did a full cost analysis comparison for a low impact development community with traditional, homes that people want to buy, versus the conventional pipe and lake system. That would be an excellent tool to help, let developers say, hey, we've got proof here that you can do better with this.
Very good. Hugh, I'm going to go back to you because on the regulatory side during our prep call, something came up along the lines with the St. John's Water Management District, and I think we have a couple of representatives here. Can you share a bit what we had talked about in terms of their ability to review projects and encourage more LID?
Sure, certainly. Thank you, Carrie. Well, I'm not going to speak really for the Water Management District, but the district is mandated by the legislature and the state law to improve water quality and to protect the waters of the citizens of the state of Florida. They have to base their decisions on science. And so in my opinion, and I think Bruce may have touched on this a little bit when we talked about the science stepping up, I don't believe there's been enough research, enough pilot projects in high groundwater, slow percolating soils to really demonstrate what treatment benefits we get out of bioswales, dry retention, things of that nature. I think all of us in the design industry have lived through designing a dry pond. If you've been in the business long enough, we've all designed dry ponds only to find out it won't stay dry. And once you have a dry pond that won't stay dry, you've got a serious mess on your hands. And so understanding that, working with the district to understand, does the separation from groundwater, from seasonal high groundwater, which is not standard groundwater, but seasonal high. So does the separation, does it really have to be 2 feet of separation, which drives a site even higher and more fill on a site, which then drives the cost up and makes preserving any sort of vegetation even that much more difficult. And so we've got to have the science behind it that the Water Management District reviewers and staff can really hang their hat on to before they can approve a site and look their bosses, which ultimately is the governor's office, in the face and say, yes, we're doing our adequate job. We're adequately protecting the resources. And so I would love to see either state or federal dollars involved, and let's get some pilot projects. Let's prove it out and let's make sure it works. What we do know is that, and I think this has been touched on, some of the urban infill projects where your choices are more limited and the are where, and oftentimes on quote better land. So you get infill in Volusia County, you get along the beach, you get in that area, then you're at higher elevations, you're on better soils. I've got a better chance of making it work. So I would like to see us invest more and more in those areas where we know that we've got a very good chance of making it work and investing there. And then in commercial development, we talk about the cost of maintenance and the homeowners, et cetera. If you do it in a commercial project, you're dealing with a single landlord, a shopping center owner, an office complex owner, et cetera. who can go out and maintain it as a single entity, as opposed to a group of homeowners that we're saddling a homeowners association or a CDD of to go maintain something, in perpetuity. And so it becomes easier if we can do it on commercial as opposed to residential projects.
I see. And Clay, I see you are nodding pretty vigorously. Did you want to add any anecdote or remark to that? Oh, you're muted. Oh, there you
If
are.
I can unmute, yes. Well, I mean, you were asking me before we started, do we have any LID projects? And I want to just, the city of Ormond Beach bought a old hotel site, which was basically 95% impervious, and they made it into Fortunato Park. And in that, or excuse me, Romano Park, Andy Romano Park. And they were able to go in, as he was just saying, they installed under drains in the parking lot. They opened up some of the areas. They installed native landscaping in the area so that way you could catch that. So redevelopment right now is our best way of capturing LID and showing success. We want it to happen with greenfield or new development. We want to see it implemented out there. But we're all facing that same situation of the uncertainty of the dependency of it. Even though we don't have a perfect system, it's at least a system that's known right now with the traditional standard. And I think Bruce brought up a very good point, is that once we're able to get something from the state that confirms what is an acceptable alternative, it will make the water management district's jobs easier. It'll make the local government's jobs easier for implementing those things.
Clay and Carrie, Clay, you just mentioned the Andy Romano Park. Someone earlier had mentioned the Ocean Center. Is that what, I think, Hugh, was that what you were talking about? Was actually, or was it, was the Ocean Center, did you mean the convention center or a different development?
No, yes, and I don't have a slide of it, but I got. How about this for old fashioned? But, so that's right there across the street from the Hilton,
Right.
In Daytona Beach. And so it's an excellent example of using it in infill situations. It's also an excellent example where the government, I believe, owns the real estate and it's not saddled. They already own it, so they're not out buying it. And and they measure returns. They don't measure every dollar and did they make money on that single project, where unfortunately for a private entity, regardless of what business you're in, you have to make money or you're not going to stay in business. And so
you've obviously not been at one of our HOB boards or any of the other ones where they're asking about how much money we're making for the Ocean Center. But you're right. I mean, what we were facing there is that was an existing developed site. There was a bunch of, there was schools out there. And when the Ocean Center was constructed, the initial one is that we didn't have the area for a stormwater pond that would normally be done that way. We had to go to, again, an under drain system, use of the swales, those types of things. And then with each subsequent expansion, you're adding impervious, you're coming in, you want to do a better job than what was there, where it was just draining right into the streets, into a pipe, right into the water. Now we're trying to do it so that there's at least some better pre-treatment. And lucky because of the sandy soils and the relatively low water table, we have a decent amount of capacity there.
I want to go back to the maintenance, the upkeep. I kept hearing there is long-term maintenance with these LID projects, and that certainly is a cost associated with it. Dennis, I had tagged you with this question, but I'm really open to the panel. What are ways that you could make the maintenance more manageable, more cost-effective? Do you think there are ways to overcome that hurdle?
Well, I wrote down, I'm a landscape architect by training. And I wrote down a few things really associated with the plants, associated with the swales and the greenscape. And if you're going to replace, well, one, acknowledge that mowing grass over a submerged concrete pipe is going to be a whole lot less expensive than maintaining shrubs and native ground covers that occasionally need to be cut back, or weeds need to be pulled out, exotics if you have that issue. But if you're gonna plant materials, you need to keep it really simple. You need to use native plants, and you need to use masses of them and not a whole bunch of fancy, even though they're native, but flowering plants that take different maintenance practices. So adding stuff just for pretty effects is going to drive up cost of maintenance. And it's really critical, and Clay made reference to this, is what is the elevation of the water going to be? Because you have to get the elevation of if you're doing littoral shelves or swells, native plants are acclimated to certain regimes of being dry or wet. And if you can get the elevations right, the native plants will cover everything and be very low maintenance. But getting the water level right is really hard, especially as things change and we have cyclical seasons.
Sure. I've heard on native plants, part of the issue is that consumers don't like the looks of them. Like you said, they want something really pretty. I'm going to ask Carl. Carl, can you share, have you found any pushback on using native plants? I mean, they're supposed to be helpful in a solution, but do people like them?
Yeah, I think that especially in the last 10 or so years, there's really been a much greater adoption of using native Florida-friendly landscapes. I think that's really become much more the norm than not. We do a lot of community development, commercial work, and by and large, we're predominantly using native plant material. There are some challenges with using plant material or native plant material. There is some limitations in what you can get in large amounts, which kind of limits your palette to some degree on these projects. Availability can be difficult. And I know that there are several industry groups right now that are kind of working on what really are the best native plants to use and so forth. Kind of to tag on to what Dennis was saying too about maintenance, I think there is generally a accepted aesthetic that people enjoy, and that really becomes the challenge with some of these LID features. If you do a bioswale in front of a residential house, I can only imagine being on the HOA board when you have to go in there and adjust the grade and rip everything out and redo it and so forth. So there is a kind of consumer education side that we really need to address in order to make some of these LID aesthetic features be more acceptable in the market.
Understood. Bruce, when we talked on the phone, you shared there are some aspects that are more cost effective even, and I know you have a slide here I can share that you can elaborate on that.
Okay, well, I'm going to take a different angle, I guess, on cost effectiveness of LID. And one of the reasons people move to Florida, or we live here, or travel to Florida, are natural resources, right? If we ruin those, growth will be stopped in its track. And that in itself is not cost effective. So we have to develop and conserve with a balance that's creative, cost effective, and LID provides those avenues. And the time, like some people have mentioned, the time where it is going to be market driven, where the consumer will determine the demand for these green solutions, is approaching very, very fast. As I mentioned before, a treatment train is far more effective at reducing pollutants in stormwater than a traditional pond. It may be that a pond is still needed at the bottom or a downstream end of a treatment train, but if designed correctly, the new pond size can be much smaller because of the reduction of pollutants that take place along the treatment train. So yeah, so some very real cost-effective solutions that LID provides. multiple stormwater systems spread out throughout the site require less land area than one large stormwater system. Grass swales or rain gardens are much cheaper to construct than an underground storm sewer pipe system to convey the water. They also provide far more pollutant reduction. And I would argue that they are easier to maintain than some storm sewer systems. Porous pavements, pervious pavement, permeable pavement, all along the same family, reduces runoff to the ultimate outfall and increases infiltration. This has been said numerous times today. And less runoff means smaller size for downstream stormwater facilities. And some LID techniques, I would argue, provide a greater aesthetic benefit. Some of these rain gardens are beautiful. I don't see them as weeds. You know, I actually prefer them to St. Augustine grass. I think they add market value, and as opposed to a traditional stormwater pond tucked away at the back of the site because it's not visually pleasing. And in areas of high land values, LID can avoid using surface of the site for stormwater management facility. Underground LID techniques such as infiltration chambers can save surface for parking, for open space, for other useful areas. If I may, I can go into a couple of project examples that VHP's done using LID. And one is at VHP, if you go to the next slide, Kelly, we designed the stormwater facilities for the Sunrail tracks and their train stations. The train stations have the train platforms, but they also contain these large parking lots with hundreds of spaces. So on the one hand, I have the traffic study, the parking study telling me how many spaces I need to have on the site. On the other hand, I have the stormwater regulations telling me how much storm volume I need on the site. This is a common developer challenge, common challenge for stormwater engineers, landscape architects, so forth. We don't have enough space and we have to fit it all in. So FDOT realized this, and even though it was not in their manuals, they allowed us to design and build 2 of the stations where practically the entire parking lot is overlaid over storm infiltration chambers that provide the stormwater management. This was around 2010, and here we thought we were pioneers. The truth is this LID solution has been used very widely. It's currently used in public infrastructure and in private development across the state. Again, if the site conditions apply. But even looking back, when I go and drive these parking lots, we could have done better. We could have used more pervious pavement on parking spaces. We could have preserved existing vegetation and open space, direct runoff to green areas, not to more pavement. We could have used Florida-friendly landscaping to reduce fertilizer use. The advantages of LID are numerous, and in the right conditions, they outweigh the cost. In this case, the site would not have been built or have been built to not meet the parking requirements that it had. I also was I have one more project. I was very lucky while I was at Altamont Springs to be part of a team that worked on the A-First project. This is not a typical site development project, but it is the expansion of a major interstate here in Central Florida. You might have heard of it, it's I-4. And it's not the typical place to implement LID. But again, many different powers that be at FDOT and Altamont gave us the green light for an alternative solution. What it consisted of was not building a 9-acre stormwater pond, 9 acres for the interstate. It would have decimated a nearby neighborhood and condemned many, many houses. Had this pond been built, water, some of the pollutants would have seeped into the groundwater and been lost forever. Traditional stormwater, right? The solution we came up with was a large-scale harvesting project, another LID technique, stormwater harvesting. Instead of a stormwater pond, the city will capture the stormwater from I-4 and treat it to be used for irrigation. The project found a way to keep the stormwater runoff from I-4 in Altamont Springs and use it in their irrigation system. Because of this major LID project, instead of losing it to the ground and the water cycle, now stormwater is captured, treated, and redirected for irrigation. When there is extra stormwater, it doesn't go to waste. In true regional fashion, the city sends it to the city of Apopka, which is experiencing water shortages of their own. So this project avoids, it's not a traditional development project, but it avoids pulling water from the aquifer to irrigate. It reduces stormwater flows to the Little Wekiva River. FDOT almost fully funded the project with the savings they had from not having to build the 9-acre retention pond. And they also eliminated a bridge on I-4 that was solely tapped for floodplain compensation. What a novel concept,
Right.
using stormwater as an alternative water supply, instead of losing it to ponds, rivers, lakes that are being contaminated. Look, it's not a novel concept, but why don't we do it more? It's a case where in this case, we were able to overcome the cost by providing some savings and touting the benefits to everybody. It was a case of really the right people in the right place at the right time. It had the partnership of FDOT, Altamont Springs, FDEP, St. John's, and the city of Apopka. So it can be done, and it can be done cost effectively if we're creative enough. And
Sure. Well, and that, why can't it be done, I think leads us to our final question. And Kelly, I know we're on a schedule here and we're running a couple minutes over, but the action items, what can we take away from this? What can we be doing, even as VCARD, to help push more of this? And I heard a couple takeaways, maybe from our panelists, a final word, Hugh. Any takeaway you think that we should focus on or could focus on or a group should take on to push this initiative?
Yes, a couple of things came to mind. One, Bruce spoke of stormwater harvesting, and I thought about the St. John's Town Center area that you may be familiar with in Jacksonville. Out there, we did two things. One, we used stormwater harvesting, and second, for a certain percentage of the parking, we did this also on the Blue Cross or Florida Blue State Headquarters campus of 2 million square feet, in that we reduced the size of the parking spaces. So instead of the traditional 18-foot deep spaces, we reduced spaces to 13.5 in exchange for the extra land being set aside in green space. And particularly with smaller cars that we're dealing with today, the spaces work fine. And so the city, the regulators were a hard sell on that, but it reduced the amount of runoff, it reduced the amount of pavement, and it provided, for that green space. And so, but the stormwater harvesting is an excellent thing that we could look at as well. It works better on commercial than it does residential because of the public reuse standards, which maybe that should be addressed by DEP or the district.
Understood. Carl, any final comments or any suggestions for takeaways?
Yeah, no, I think several excellent points have been made today. Suggestions, be it pilot projects or so forth. I think we, as a design professional, you don't really want to be the maverick that goes and tries something new necessarily. As somebody that signs and seals plans, that can be kind of scary. I think more tools for design professionals that they can really rely on, that the regulators also rely on, are needed for us to kind of move the profession forward and also help us educate our customers, and really bake in a lot of the science that we talked about, but also create a toolkit that works for different soil conditions and so forth across the state. Because one site you can do LID, no problem. Another site, you got incredible costs to even try it if it'll work at all.
Clay, VCARD well, anything we could take on, you think?
I think one thing that Bruce brought up was just, first of all, monitoring what's going on. And I will talk with our legislative person, John Booker, to monitor what's going on at the state level to ensure that we're continuing kind of a hardcore press, maybe engage your groups, but also we could look at Florida Association of Counties and the National League or Florida League of Cities to make sure that we are keeping up with the technology and the ability to have standards put in place. I go back to what DOT did. For years, you know, everything was out of the green book and you had to follow their standards. And then they came up with a book that allowed for you to do alternative designs so that way you could do some neo-traditional or redevelopment type of projects. So if we can do that at a state level with our DEP and work with our St. John's staff to come up with something like Bruce was talking about, that would help out, you know, even if it's just a toolkit for local governments, that would help us out and give the design professionals options. And, you know, I think we heard, you know, we forget about something. The folks who have the PE after their name or RLA after their name, if what they design fails, they're responsible for it. So that's, you know, your risk management and adventuresomeness is curbed when you face multi-million-dollar personal liability lawsuits.
Wow. Yeah, not aware of that. Dennis, any final comment or suggestions for the group?
Well, I don't really consider regulation as an incentive to do these kinds of things, but I've worked in a lot of jurisdictions that have more regulations in this regard. I mean, 25% of your lakes have to have littoral plantings, X amount of littoral shelf per lake in other water management districts and other counties. So developers are going to be more inclined to do these things if they have to. So I'll just say that
Okay.
and leave it at that.
Okay. And Bruce, any final comment before we wrap up?
I won't be repetitive. I want to thank everybody because like everybody said, the path of least resistance is to follow the book and design from the book. And LID is usually not the path of least resistance, but something like this just motivates me to try different things and be creative. There's a lot of interest in it, apparently, and we forget, especially working from home. So thank you.
Very good. Kelly?
Thank you. Carrie, you know, we had several speakers talk about the book, the standard conventional development book versus these LID design manuals that Clay and a couple of other people have mentioned. There are some funding mechanisms to develop these manuals, sort of toolkits for local governments. We do know that the EPA has a fund for non-point source pollution prevention that actually will fund green infrastructure, pilot projects. They're looking for demonstration projects. Those grants come through the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. They typically receive grants twice a year in the spring and the fall. And there has to be a local partner, a local government partner. So that may be something, you know, VCARD wanted to take a look at some of the manuals that these 319 grants have already funded for other counties. You know, the manual for Alachua County might be more applicable to West Volusia. The manual for Martin County might be more applicable to, you know, Southeast Volusia, for example. So, you know, that could be something that if VCARD wanted to, I know you've got lots of committees and a lot of expertise at reviewing these, you know, sort of design standards and recommendations. You know, and then we could share that with, you know, the environmental community and the scientific community, and maybe, you know, come up with something that, you know, that Clay and, you know, local governments could use as a tool in the toolbox. Great.
And Kelly, I would add to that, I would also like to add, I should say to that there is work going on with DEP through that non-point source pollution program that you mentioned. And so you will see more information coming out, I think, over the next year on tools and things that can be used. And certainly we talk to them often. So, you know, I'll definitely share what we've talked about today with them.
Thank you so much. And I should mention that, Katrina is the author of the grant that's funding this program tonight. It's grant funded. So, and it's something that she's been doing, on the ground, having received the grant in, 2018. So thank you for Katrina doing that. I do want to hand off to Bill Kochman, a retired major with the United States Army, president of the Florida Green Building Coalition. Bill, I'm going to just give you 5 minutes to sort of run through your slides, but just sort of as an introduction to Bill, Bill has a background in education as well as being a builder himself and a green building certifying agent. And so we wanted to end with Bill and FGBC as a takeaway that Bill has programs, FGBC has programs for realtors. They have programs, they've done workshops with us with the academies that we've been having. He's got, he can do hour-long, day-long programs on things that LID that we can do in our homes all the way to neighborhood and government scale. Clay, you mentioned that Volusia County is an FGB certified green local government, and that's huge. That's rare. That's something to be really, really proud of. Bill and the FGBC, they are a resource for us, for any individuals as well as local governments. So Bill, I'm going to toss it to you and welcome you. And you're gonna give us some, solutions, right? We talked about a lot of hurdles to LID, and there are plenty, but there are some really good things that can happen. So Bill, if you can unmute yourself, I'll share. Would you like me to share your PowerPoint from my?
Yeah, if you can take to slide number 3, because since we're shortened down, I'll try to, that's probably the most important one right now.
Okay. I'm going to go there now.
It'd be the 4th slide, excuse me.
Okay. Oops.
I'd do it on my computer, but I lost it this afternoon.
Oh no.
I'm on the backup right now.
Okay, I'm sharing now. I'm going to.
I really enjoyed listening to everybody tonight. I'm Bill Catchman. I'm the current president of Florida Green Building Coalition. And if it comes back up, we've been around we're in our 21st year right now, and we're a certifying agency. We certify homes, we certify multifamily, we certify high rise, we certify commercial, we certify local governments, and we certify land development. And the biggest thing is we're a nonprofit organization. We don't do this for the money. What money we do bring in just keeps us in business being able to do this. But we've taken the smart people from the industry, from construction, government, academic, research communities, and created green standards specifically tailored towards Florida. And as of today, we've certified 24,788 projects in the state of Florida. And it's way, way more than any other certifying agency has done. And we basically are all straight Florida and for Florida. One of the things that was brought up, and the word I like to use that was brought up in the forum, is we're a toolkit for you to go out there and do what you need to do. All of our standards, all of our check sheets, all of our research and everything is all online and it's free. It's right there for the public. And if you go to down this, you'll see the first slide with a picture on it. There we go. FGBC, it's floridagreenbuilding.org. And at the top, right above the FGBC logo, you'll see Home Join FGB Certification. Under the certification tab shows all of our certifications. And the way we do that is we have our standards, what we're trying to adopt and everything else, and what we have to live by as certifying agents and as FGBC. But then we have a booklet that actually shows everything that we'd like to certify, the intent of it, how to do it, and why to do it. And then the check sheet then keeps score of how you do it. So when you get to land development, we actually have a built LID system right there, which we had help from St. Johns River Management District for the water star aspect of it. Audubon's helped us out with golf courses and other things. University of Florida with the Florida Friendly Yards and Neighborhood. The Solar Research Institute down at Cocoa has helped us with all the energy requirements and everything else. ASHI is now helping us with rainwater harvesting, which we finally have entered into our home standards, and we've got it in our land development standards. So all these things are there, and we've got a toolkit and a book already built. We've got 7 different ones that are certified in the state of Florida right now. The biggest one being Babcock Ranch. If you have time, go online, look at Babcock Ranch. It is a platinum certified development. Lakewood Ranch, which is a medium-sized development, they have the highest selling rate of homes in the United States. So will they build it? Is it worthwhile? Yeah, they're selling houses like hotcakes. Oakland Park, which is over in Winter Gardens, was a low certifier, but it's a really nice development. You can drive over there someday on a weekend and walk through the community. It's a beautiful community. A little bit higher density than we would like, but when they were certified, that's what we were allowing. Every 3 years, we look at all of our standards and we redo them. If somebody comes up with a better idea, we look at it, we verify it, and then we certify it. And the biggest thing that makes us different from everybody else is a certifying agent goes out on the ground, sees it, documents it, turns it in. A third-party agency then looks at it, verifies it before it's certified. So there's always another set of eyes looking at everything you're doing in a certification project. And anybody can join. We're always looking for help. So that's the toolkit. You use it as you'd like to use it. And I think we're there for everybody, and we're always open to questions, answers, and thank you for having us.
Great. Thank you, Bill. That was fantastic.
In 5 minutes.
I'll tell you, man, right on the money. Really appreciate that. And again, thank you, Carrie, Katrina, Dr. Wendy Anderson. Wendy has been, by the way, answering questions in our chat boxes as we've gone through. So, and as several people have. And so I've been writing down the questions. So those that we don't necessarily haven't addressed today, we're going to try to get those out to you. We have been talking about really this being, Katrina and I have seen this workshop as sort of the culmination of several years of working on green infrastructure and low impact development. But really, we've tried to change our mindset a little bit and think about it as the beginning. And we're going to try to have some additional online forums, and just the creation of this workshop gave us some great ideas for future workshops. We could have a whole 2-hour workshop just on, working with realtors and buyer education and what is beautiful. Is it okay? Is it beautiful to have a lawn that maybe browns up a little bit, in the dry season or the winter time? We can talk about lender issues. We can talk about we can have an entire session on green building and what that means from the landscape aspect, large scale, certifying the local government, down to certifying the neighborhood, down to certifying the home. And certainly looking at some of these, regulatory aspects. We could have a regulators panel for a future workshop. So if you have suggestions for future workshops, if you have more specific questions, please email those to us. This panel is being recorded, and it will be published on the Volusia County Environmental Management YouTube channel. And for those of you who opened up your agenda item, the link to that YouTube site is at the very bottom of the agenda. Obviously, it will probably be Monday before the video is actually able to be uploaded to that site. But there are a lot of other presentations on green building, groundwater, low impact development, fertilizer reduction, a lot of wonderful presentations there. There's a lot of information at the greenvolusia.org website. That's Katrina's, the county's website for this program. And we have about 10 fact sheets from the EPA on low impact development. So if you want to take a deeper dive into that, we will try to get that online as well. And let's see, make sure, and if there are any pilot projects that we can explore, very much looking forward to the partnerships. Thank you so much to our wonderful panel. It took a lot of time to prepare for this, and I think we have a really diverse audience, and I hope that this is a start of a lot of great conversation. Any last points before we say goodbye and good evening? Carrie, Katrina?
Or Carrie, do you have anything? I just want to say thank you to everybody, the panelists and the attendees for being here today. So as you mentioned, Kelly, this is a great start to a lot more conversations, which I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, and I'd like to thank the panelists as well and my V-Card members for their support of this project. So thank you all, and thanks for facilitating, Kelly.
Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful evening. And we will hopefully be joining you again soon. Take care. Good night.